Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UCS Liberty and looked at the stars through the massive viewing window. His gray hair showed his 50 years of service to humanity and the galaxy. Today would be his last day speaking to alien worlds as a friend. His hands shook slightly as he prepared to send the message that would change everything. "Open all channels," Jake told his communications officer. "Make sure every known species receives this transmission." Lieutenant Amy Foster pressed the buttons on her console. "All channels open, Admiral." "The entire galaxy is listening." Jake took a deep breath. He had given thousands of speeches before, but none like this one. Behind him stood Dr. Lisa Reynolds, the woman who had spent 30 years studying alien biology and helping sick aliens across the galaxy. Her face looked tired and sad. She had seen too many humans die for ungrateful species. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet," he began. "I speak for all of humanity today. This will be our final message to the galactic community." Across the galaxy, billions of aliens stopped what they were doing to listen. On Corvani Prime, the bird-like Corvani leaders gathered around their screens. On Delian stations, the blue-skinned Delians turned up their translators. Even the proud Zenthari put down their crystal tools to hear what the humans had to say. "For 300 years we have served as your protectors," Jake continued. "We have shared our medicine, our technology, and our knowledge freely. We have sent our children to die defending your worlds. We have stopped your wars and healed your sick. We have asked for nothing in return except friendship." Dr. Lisa Reynolds stepped forward. She had prepared these words for weeks, but speaking them felt like cutting out her own heart. 2 months ago, humanity lost 2 million soldiers defending the Zephyrian system. We died protecting species who had called us friends. Within days of our victory, those same species returned to fighting each other over mining rights. They forgot our sacrifice as quickly as morning fog disappears. The message was being translated into thousands of languages across the galaxy. On viewing screens everywhere, aliens saw the pain in human faces. Some felt guilt. Others felt anger. Most felt confusion. Commander Alex Thompson appeared on screen next. He was younger than the Admiral, but his eyes looked ancient. He had evacuated human civilians from 12 different wars in the past 5 years. "The human race has voted," he said simply. "We are withdrawing from all galactic affairs. Every human military unit, every human diplomat, every human civilian will return to Earth within 6 months." The reactions across the galaxy were immediate and varied. Some alien leaders laughed, thinking this was a negotiation tactic. Others panicked, knowing how much their worlds depended on human support. A few felt relief, believing they could finally govern themselves without human interference. "But you cannot leave," transmitted Chancellor Vextar of the Corvani Empire. "The trade routes need protection. The medical stations save millions of lives. The peace treaties require human oversight." Jake Morrison's face remained hard as stone. "We have given you centuries to learn to live in peace. You have chosen war, hatred, and greed instead. We will no longer enable your destructive choices." The human withdrawal began immediately. Captain Ben Hughes received orders to evacuate the human peacekeeping base on Neutral Station 7. He had spent 15 years there, helping solve disputes between dozens of species. Now he watched his soldiers pack up equipment that had kept the peace for decades. "What happens when we leave?" asked Sergeant Linda Hayes, one of his senior officers. "They learn to solve their own problems," Ben replied. "Or they destroy themselves trying." Dr. Susan Clark was supervising the closure of medical stations across the Outer Rim. These facilities had been providing free health care to primitive species for over a century. She watched alien patients pleading with human doctors not to leave. The doctors wanted to stay, but orders were orders. "We trained thousands of your people," she told the alien medical staff. "You have the knowledge. Use it," but the humans knew the truth. Many alien species had become completely dependent on human support. They had stopped developing their own technologies, relying instead on human gifts. Their militaries were trained by human officers. Their economies ran on human-maintained trade routes. Their governments followed human-written constitutions. On Earth, President John Smith addressed his own people. "We have been the galaxy's unpaid police force for too long," he said. "Our children have died for species who see us as servants, not friends. It is time to let them stand on their own." The withdrawal proceeded with military efficiency. Captain Danny Foster led the evacuation of human mining operations in the asteroid belt of the Miran system. The local aliens had never learned to operate the equipment themselves. They had simply collected the refined metals and sold them. "Sir, they are offering us triple payment to stay," reported Lieutenant Tony Martinez. "Not for sale," Danny replied. "Some lessons cannot be bought." The last human diplomatic mission was led by Ambassador Grace Kelly. She had spent 20 years negotiating peace treaties between warring species. Now she was delivering dissolution notices to every government humanity had helped establish. "You taught us democracy," pleaded Prime Minister Zelda of the Delian Republic. "Without your guidance, we will fall back into chaos." "Democracy cannot be taught," Grace replied. "It must be chosen again and again by free people. If you only followed our example because we were watching, then you never truly learned the lesson." As the months passed, human ships departed from every corner of the galaxy. The great medical stations went dark. The peacekeeping fleets returned to Earth. The trade route beacons shut down one by one. The diplomatic embassies closed their doors forever. Admiral Morrison stood on the Bridge of the Liberty as it entered Earth's solar system for the last time. Behind them, the galaxy was already beginning to change. Without human oversight, old enemies were mobilizing their fleets. Without human medicine, plagues were spreading unchecked. Without human protection, the weak were becoming prey for the strong. "Do you think we are doing the right thing?" asked Dr. Reynolds. Jake looked at Earth growing larger in the view screen. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall, so they can learn to stand up on their own." The final human ship crossed into Sol system, and massive defense platforms activated behind them. The message was clear. Humanity was home and the galaxy was on its own. The golden age of human protection was over. What came next would depend entirely on what the aliens had truly learned from 3 centuries of human friendship. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if it could survive without its guardians. 8 years after humanity had sealed its borders, the galaxy had stabilized in its new reality of constant struggle and limited hope. Admiral Carl Johnson commanded the Sol system defense grid from his fortress station at the edge of human space, watching the alien ships that approached daily with desperate messages and impossible offers. "Sir, we have another diplomatic convoy requesting permission to approach Earth," reported Captain Linda Hayes from the Communications Center. "This one claims to represent a coalition of 47 surviving governments." Carl looked at the sensor readings showing the small fleet of battered alien ships holding position just outside human space. These vessels looked like they had seen too many battles and traveled too many desperate journeys. Their hulls were patched with salvaged materials, and their energy signatures indicated they were running on emergency power. "Put them through," Carl ordered. "Let's hear what they have to say this time." The main screen flickered to life, showing a diverse group of alien leaders crowded into what appeared to be a converted cargo hold. Carl recognized Chancellor Vextar of the remaining Corvani territories, though the proud bird-like being looked far older and more tired than when humans had last seen him. Beside him stood Prime Minister Zelda of the Delian survivor colonies, her blue skin pale with exhaustion. "Admiral Johnson," Vextar began, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. "We come not as conquerors or negotiators, but as students seeking wisdom from their teachers." Carl felt no satisfaction at seeing these once proud leaders humbled. The reports from the galaxy had been horrific enough that even the most isolation-minded humans found it difficult to feel vindicated by alien suffering. "We acknowledge our failures," continued Prime Minister Zelda. "We understand now that we were children playing with toys we did not comprehend. The galaxy has paid a terrible price for our ignorance and pride." Behind the main speakers, Carl could see representatives from dozens of other species. Some he recognized from the old days. Others were clearly survivors from worlds he had thought completely destroyed. All of them wore the same expression of desperate hope mixed with genuine humility. Dr. Susan Clark was analyzing the psychological profiles of the alien delegation from her research facility on Mars. Her preliminary reports showed dramatic changes in alien behavior, patterns compared to pre-withdrawal data. These are not the same beings who resented human guidance 8 years ago. Susan reported to the Government Council. The psychological markers indicate genuine transformation rather than mere desperation. The surviving alien leaders had learned cooperation out of necessity. The refugee crises had forced different species to work together in ways they had never managed during the peaceful years of human oversight. Former enemies were sharing resources and knowledge because the alternative was extinction. Commander Nathan Cross had finally been rescued from Altarian Prime 6 months earlier, and his debriefing reports provided crucial insights into how alien societies had adapted. The Altarians who had survived the plague and famine had developed new forms of democratic governance that incorporated lessons from multiple species. They have created something genuinely new. Nathan reported to the Xenocultural Analysis team, not copies of human institutions, but hybrid systems that reflect their own values while incorporating practical cooperation strategies. The surviving Altarians had established councils that included refugees from several other species. Instead of trying to recreate the paradise they had lost, they were building sustainable communities based on what they could actually maintain with their own knowledge and resources. Professor Kate Williams was documenting similar developments across the galaxy from her monitoring station. The surviving populations were abandoning attempts to maintain high-technology civilizations and instead focusing on building resilient, sustainable societies. The Thessarian survivors have established agricultural communes on 17 different worlds, Kate reported. They are using traditional farming methods combined with simple biotechnology they can actually understand and maintain. These new settlements were nothing like the grand civilizations that had existed during humanity's protection, but they were stable and self-sufficient. The survivors had learned to value sustainability over sophistication, cooperation over competition. Captain Ryan Parker was observing the reconstruction of limited trade networks using much simpler technology than the old hyperspace beacon system. Instead of trying to maintain complex quantum navigation computers, the surviving civilizations had developed convoy systems using basic radio guidance. Travel times between systems have increased by a factor of 10, Ryan noted. But they are using technology they can actually repair and maintain themselves. The new trade networks were small and local compared to the galaxy-spanning commerce of the old days, but they were growing steadily as different survivor communities learned to trust each other and share resources. Back on Earth, President John Smith faced the most difficult decision of his administration. The alien delegation had been waiting outside human space for 3 weeks, and their messages were becoming increasingly desperate. Not desperate for rescue, but desperate for a chance to prove they had learned from their mistakes. They are offering something unprecedented, reported Secretary Peter Adams during the emergency cabinet meeting. Complete transparency in their governments, permanent non-aggression pacts between all member species, and shared control of any advanced technology we might provide. The offers were indeed remarkable. The surviving alien governments were proposing to abandon the sovereign independence they had once fought to protect. They wanted humanity to return, but as genuine partners rather than distant protectors. General Tony Martinez presented the military assessment of the galactic situation. Frankly, sir, they no longer have the capacity to threaten anyone, including each other. Their combined military forces are smaller than what some individual species maintained during the peace years. The great fleets that had once fought devastating wars were gone, destroyed in the conflicts that had followed humanity's withdrawal. The survivors had learned that warfare was a luxury they could no longer afford. Dr. Ben Hughes had been analyzing the demographic data from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering in their implications for the future of galactic civilization. Total galactic population has dropped from an estimated 4 trillion beings to approximately 200 billion, he reported grimly. However, the survival rate among mixed species colonies is significantly higher than among single-species settlements. The species that had learned to cooperate across racial lines were thriving in their new circumstances. Those that had retreated into isolationism were slowly dying out as their technological base deteriorated beyond recovery. Ambassador Grace Kelly had been conducting preliminary negotiations with the alien delegation through long-range communications. Her assessment of their sincerity was cautiously optimistic. These are not the same beings who called us oppressive overlords, Grace reported to the diplomatic corps. They have genuinely learned to value what we provided, and more importantly, they have learned to provide it for themselves. The most significant change was in how the surviving species viewed strength and leadership. Instead of seeing human guidance as a limitation on their freedom, they now understood it as a service that had prevented countless tragedies. Captain Danny Foster was documenting the cultural changes taking place in the refugee communities. Art, literature, and philosophy among the survivors reflected a fundamental shift in values away from dominance and toward cooperation. They are creating memorial works dedicated to the billions who died during the collapse, Danny reported. But these are not monuments to victory or defeat. They are reminders of the price of hatred and ignorance. The new alien cultures were built around remembering the lessons of the collapse. Children were taught about the time when different species had worked together under human guidance, and about what had happened when pride and prejudice had destroyed that cooperation. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez had been monitoring the changes from her observation station for 8 years. Her final report before returning to Earth was both heartbreaking and hopeful. They have learned what we tried to teach them for 3 centuries, Elena concluded, but they learned it through suffering rather than wisdom. The question now is whether we can find a way to help them build something better without creating the same dependencies that led to this tragedy. The alien delegation continued to wait patiently outside human space, making no demands and issuing no threats. They had sent detailed proposals for limited cooperation agreements, offered cultural exchanges, and provided complete information about their current capabilities and needs. Most importantly, they had demonstrated their independence by surviving 8 years without human support. They were not asking for rescue or protection. They were asking for partnership with teachers they had finally learned to respect. President Smith stood at the observation deck of Luna Station, looking out at the stars where human ships had once traveled freely. The decision before him would determine not just the future of human-alien relations, but the fate of galactic civilization itself. 5 years had passed since humanity closed its borders and the galaxy was dying. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hughes led a covert reconnaissance team through the ruins of what had once been the Zenthari Federation's capital world. The crystal spires that had once reached toward the stars now lay shattered across the landscape like broken dreams. Take readings on atmospheric composition, Ben ordered his team. I want to know exactly how bad this has gotten. Sergeant Maria Torres checked her instruments and shook her head in disbelief. Sir, the air is barely breathable. Toxic levels of industrial pollutants everywhere. How did they manage to poison their own atmosphere this badly? Ben knew the answer, though it made him sick to think about it. When humanity had helped the Zenthari build their civilization, human environmental engineers had designed self-maintaining atmospheric processors. The Zenthari had operated these machines for decades without understanding how they worked. When the processors needed repairs, the Zenthari had tried to fix them with crude industrial methods that created more pollution than they removed. Look at that, whispered Private Alex Thompson, pointing toward what had once been a beautiful residential district. The crystal homes were blackened and cracked. Bodies lay in the streets both from violence and from the poisoned air. These people used to live like paradise. The team moved carefully through the dead city, documenting the collapse of Zenthari civilization. Without human cultural programs to maintain peace between different ethnic groups, the Zenthari had returned to tribal warfare, with a vengeance. But now they were fighting with advanced weapons they barely understood, turning their own cities into toxic graveyards. Meanwhile, Dr. Kate Williams was analyzing data from the former Thessarian Republic. Her reports painted an even grimmer picture. The Thessarian homeworld had been one of humanity's greatest terraforming achievements, a barren rock transformed into a garden world that supported billions of lives. Oceanic pH levels have dropped by 30% in the past year, Kate reported to the monitoring station. The marine ecosystem is collapsing. Fish populations are down 90% from pre-withdrawal levels. The Thessarians had maintained their paradise for decades using human-designed biological systems. Specially engineered bacteria kept the oceans clean. Modified plant species maintained atmospheric balance. Artificial reef systems supported vast food chains. But these systems required constant monitoring and occasional adjustments that only human biotechnologists had understood. Without that expertise, the Thessarians had tried to maintain the systems themselves. Their well-meaning efforts had disrupted delicate biological balances, triggering cascade failures that were destroying their entire biosphere. Billions of Thessarians were fleeing their dying homeworld, creating a refugee crisis that was overwhelming neighboring systems. Captain Ryan Parker was documenting the complete breakdown of galactic trade from his observation post near the former Nexus trade station. What had once been the busiest commercial, hub in the galaxy was now a drifting derelict surrounded by the wreckage of ships that had tried unsuccessfully to navigate without human guidance. Another convoy reported lost in hyperspace, Ryan announced to his crew. That makes 47 merchant vessels this month alone. The hyperspace beacon network that had connected the galaxy was failing system by system. Without human engineers to maintain the complex quantum computers that generated navigation signals, the beacons were going dark one by one. Ships that tried to travel between stars often became lost in the void, their crews dying slowly as life support systems failed. The economic impact was catastrophic. Star systems that had depended on imported food were facing starvation. Worlds that had specialized in manufacturing specific goods could no longer reach their markets. The carefully balanced galactic economy that had supported trillions of beings was fragmenting into isolated pockets of desperate survivors. Commander Nathan Cross was still trapped on Altarian Prime, watching helplessly as the species he had tried to save descended into chaos. The Red Plague had killed over 1 billion Altarians in the past 3 years, but that was only the beginning of their troubles. Doctor, the southern continent is reporting massive crop failures, Elder Talon informed him with desperation in her voice. The genetic modifications you helped us develop are not working anymore. Nathan closed his eyes in pain. He had spent years helping the Altarians develop disease-resistant crops that could grow in their harsh climate. But the genetic modifications required periodic updates as new plant diseases evolved. Without access to Earth's agricultural databases and without human biotechnologists to develop new solutions, the crops were falling prey to blights that would have been easily prevented in the old days. How many people do you estimate will survive the next harvest season? Nathan asked, though he dreaded the answer. Perhaps 10% of our current population, Talon replied quietly. We are preparing to evacuate our cities and return to subsistence farming. But most of us no longer remember how to grow food without advanced technology. The Altarians had become completely dependent on human-developed agricultural science. They had stopped teaching traditional farming methods to their children, assuming that human technology would always be available. Now they were facing the possibility of extinction through starvation on their own homeworld. Professor Linda Hayes was monitoring the collapse of alien educational systems from her research station on Earth's moon. Her data showed that the galaxy was literally forgetting how to think. Universities that had once produced brilliant scientists and philosophers were closing their doors. Libraries containing millennia of accumulated knowledge were being abandoned as populations fled their homeworlds. The University of New Corvanus has announced that it is converting its physics laboratories into weapons manufacturing facilities. Linda reported to the Academic Council. 30,000 years of scientific research and they are using the equipment to build bombs. Without human professors to guide advanced research, alien universities had lost their intellectual leadership. The remaining alien faculty had been trained to follow human-developed curricula, but had never learned to push the boundaries of knowledge themselves. As wars consumed more resources, practical military applications took priority over pure research. Medical schools were abandoning advanced surgical techniques because they lacked human instructors who understood the procedures. Engineering programs were reverting to teaching primitive technologies because the professors could not maintain the sophisticated equipment that humans had provided. Philosophy and literature departments were closing entirely as societies focused on immediate survival needs. Ambassador Grace Kelly reviewed the intelligence reports from her office on Earth, trying to maintain her professional composure as she read about the galaxy-wide collapse. The scale of suffering was beyond anything in recorded history, but she knew that intervening now would only delay the necessary lessons. Ma'am, we are receiving another desperate plea from the Delian Republic, reported Secretary Peter Adams. Prime, Minister Zelda is offering to surrender complete sovereignty to human authority if we will just stop the Corvani invasion of their core systems. Grace had been expecting this. The Delian Republic and the Corvani Empire had been locked in increasingly brutal warfare for 5 years. Without human peacekeepers to enforce rules of engagement, both sides had escalated to using weapons of mass destruction. Entire planets were being rendered uninhabitable as the two species tried to completely exterminate each other. What are the casualty estimates? Grace asked. Combined military and civilian losses exceed 4 billion beings, Peter replied grimly. Both governments are beginning to collapse as their populations flee to neutral systems. The irony was heartbreaking. The same species that had resented human oversight and had insisted on their right to self-governance were now begging to become human colonies. But Grace knew that accepting these surrenders would only restart the cycle of dependency that had led to this crisis. Captain Danny Foster was monitoring the refugee ships that were arriving in human space every day. These vessels were packed with alien survivors fleeing the chaos consuming their homeworlds. Earth's automated defense systems allowed them to approach but did not permit them to land. Refugee ship Mercy's Hope is requesting permission to dock at Luna Station, Danny reported. They have 50,000 Thessarian civilians aboard, mostly children. The refugee ships were heartbreaking to see. Overcrowded vessels designed for short trips were carrying desperate families across interstellar distances. Many ships arrived with half their passengers dead from starvation or disease. Others broke down just outside human space, their crews lacking the technical knowledge to maintain their own ships for extended voyages. But Earth's government remained firm in its isolation policy. The refugees were provided with emergency supplies and directions to neutral systems that might accept them, but they were not allowed to enter human space. The message was clear. Humanity would not resume its role as caretaker to the galaxy. Dr. Susan Clark was analyzing the psychological impact of humanity's withdrawal from her research facility on Mars. 2 years had passed since the last human ship left alien space, and the galaxy was bleeding. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in her small observation station at the edge of known space, monitoring communications from civilizations that were tearing themselves apart. She had once been humanity's top diplomatic officer, but now she could only watch as her life's work crumbled. Another distress call from the Corvani sector, reported her assistant Lieutenant Carl Johnson. The Ninth Fleet is requesting immediate medical support. Elena shook her head sadly. They still think we will come running to save them. She had heard hundreds of these calls over the past months. The Corvani Empire and the Delian Republic had resumed their ancient war within weeks of humanity's departure. Without human peacekeepers to enforce the ceasefire, both sides had launched attacks that would have been unthinkable during the peace years. The casualty reports made Elena sick to read. In the old days, human shield generators protected civilian populations during conflicts. Human medical teams treated wounded soldiers from both sides equally. Human negotiators stopped battles before they became massacres. Now the fighting was brutal and primitive, like something from the Dark Ages. Commander Nathan Cross had been one of the few humans who stayed behind. He had spent 15 years working with the Altarian species, helping them fight genetic diseases that had plagued their people for millennia. When the withdrawal began, he could not abandon his patients. Now he wished he had listened to orders. "Dr. Cross, please help us," begged Elder Tylan, leader of the Altarian Council. "The Red Plague has returned, and we do not know how to stop it." Nathan looked at the data scrolling across his medical scanner. The plague was indeed back, spreading through Altarian cities like wildfire. He knew the cure existed in Earth's medical databases, but those systems had been sealed when humanity withdrew. The local Altarian doctors he had trained could treat symptoms, but they had never learned to create the sophisticated antiviral compounds needed for a cure. "I can treat a few hundred patients with the supplies I have left," Nathan said quietly. "But there are millions infected across your worlds." The Altarians stared at him with their large, dark eyes. They had always assumed human medicine would be available forever. They had never bothered to build the advanced laboratories needed to manufacture the treatments themselves. Now billions would die from a disease that should have been easily stopped. Meanwhile, the Traitors' Alliance was collapsing as thoroughly as if someone had cut the threads holding the galaxy together. Captain Ryan Parker had been monitoring their situation from a hidden observation post near the major trade routes. What he saw horrified him. "The Nexus trade station is reporting 17 ships stranded in hyperspace," he told his small crew. "Their navigation beacons failed 3 days ago. The hyperspace routes that connected the galaxy had been built and maintained by human engineers for over 2 centuries. The alien species used them constantly but had never learned how the technology worked. They treated the navigation beacons like magic devices that simply existed, never thinking about maintenance or backup systems. Now those beacons were failing one by one, and ships were becoming lost in the void between stars. Entire star systems were cut off from galactic trade, facing starvation as supply ships could no longer find them. The carefully balanced economy that had fed trillions of beings was collapsing into isolated pockets of desperate survivors. Lieutenant Kate Williams was documenting the political failures from her monitoring station near Xanthari space. She had once helped establish democratic governments on dozens of worlds, teaching alien species about human concepts of freedom and representation. Now she watched those same governments fall like houses built on sand. The Xanthari Federation just declared martial law, she reported to Earth. General Kextar has dissolved the elected council and declared himself supreme leader. The Xanthari had been one of humanity's greatest success stories. Their beautiful crystal cities had been models of peaceful cooperation between different ethnic groups. Human cultural exchange programs had helped them overcome centuries of tribal hatred. But without human oversight, old prejudices had returned stronger than ever. The crystal cities were burning now. Different Xanthari clans were fighting street battles over resources and territory. The democratic institutions that had taken decades to build were swept away in days. The Xanthari had learned to copy human governmental forms, but they had never truly understood the principles behind them. Dr. Ben Hughes was tracking the refugee crisis from Earth's deep space sensors. His reports painted a picture of unprecedented suffering. Without human-coordinated relief efforts, displaced populations were dying in the cold vacuum of space. Refugee ship Delta 7 reports life support failure, he announced to the Emergency Council. 2,000 beings aboard, mostly Thessarian civilians fleeing the Civil War. In the old days, human rescue ships would have responded within hours. Human engineers would have repaired the failing systems. Human transport vessels would have carried the refugees to safety. Now the ship would drift until its air ran out, and 2,000 people would die because no one else had learned to care about aliens they did not know. The Thessarian homeworld itself was becoming uninhabitable. Colonel Tony Martinez had been observing the environmental disaster unfolding there. The Thessarians had built their paradise with human terraforming technology, but they had never learned to maintain the complex systems that kept their world livable. Atmospheric processors are failing across the northern continent, Tony reported. Toxic levels of carbon dioxide are building up in major population centers. The Thessarians were trying desperately to repair the damage, but their attempts only made things worse. They understood how to operate the machines when they worked properly, but they had no idea how to fix them when they broke down. Their beautiful cities were becoming poisonous wastelands, and millions were fleeing to other worlds that could not support them. Professor Linda Hayes had been monitoring the collapse of education systems across the galaxy. The great universities where human and alien scholars had worked together were closing their doors. Libraries were being looted for fuel. Laboratories were being converted into weapons factories. The University of Proxima Centauri Prime has announced its closure, she reported sadly. 30,000 years of accumulated knowledge, and they are selling the equipment to buy food. Without human professors and researchers, alien universities had lost their most innovative thinkers. The alien faculty had been trained to follow human-developed curricula, but they had never learned to push the boundaries of knowledge themselves. Research programs that had promised breakthrough discoveries were abandoned. Medical schools stopped teaching advanced techniques. Engineering programs reverted to teaching primitive technologies. Captain Danny Foster was documenting the military disasters spreading across the galaxy. Without human military advisors, alien armies were falling apart under the stress of actual combat. The Corvani and Delian forces were suffering casualties at rates that would have been unimaginable during the peace years. Corvani's 7th Army reports 80% casualties in the Cair battle for mining station Epsilon, Danny observed grimly. Both sides are using human-designed weapons, but they have no idea how to coordinate attacks or minimize losses. The aliens had copied human military technology and tactics, but they had never understood the strategic thinking behind them. They fought like children playing with their parents' tools, causing destruction they could not comprehend or control. Ancient hatreds were driving them to use weapons designed for precise peacekeeping operations in campaigns of total annihilation. Ambassador Grace Kelly reviewed all the reports from her office on Earth. She had spent her career building bridges between species, and now she watched those bridges burn. The most painful part was knowing that this suffering could have been prevented if the aliens had simply learned to value what humanity had given them. "Sir, we are receiving direct pleas from the Galactic Council remnants," reported her aide, Secretary Peter Adams. "They are offering us anything we want if we will just return to active peacekeeping." Grace closed her eyes and remembered the Zephyrian crisis. 2 million humans had died protecting allies who had immediately gone back to fighting each other over mineral rights. The same pattern was repeating everywhere now, but without human forces to absorb the casualties. "Tell them," Grace said slowly, "that some lessons can only be learned through pain. They chose to treat us as servants instead of partners. Now they must learn to be their own masters." Outside her window, Earth was experiencing a renaissance. Human colonists had returned from across the galaxy, bringing their knowledge and energy home. Human scientists were making incredible breakthroughs now that they could focus on human problems instead of babysitting alien civilizations. Human artists were creating beautiful works inspired by their own culture, instead of trying to accommodate alien sensibilities. But Elena Rodriguez, still monitoring the galaxy from her lonely station, knew the cost of this human renewal. Every day brought new reports of alien civilizations sliding backward into darkness. Wars that had been prevented for centuries were raging across hundreds of worlds. 10 years had passed since humanity closed its borders, and the galaxy had found a new balance born from necessity and tempered by loss. President John Smith stood in the council chambers of the reformed Earth government, facing the most important decision in human history. Before him lay detailed reports about the alien delegation that had waited patiently outside Sol system for 6 months. "They have proven they can survive without us," reported Secretary Peter Adams, reviewing the latest intelligence data. "More importantly, they have proven they can cooperate without us forcing them to do so." The evidence was remarkable. The surviving alien civilizations had spent the past 2 years forming genuine cooperative alliances based on mutual benefit rather than human oversight. Former enemies were sharing resources and knowledge freely. Multi-species colonies were thriving in ways that single-species settlements never had. During the old era of human protection, Captain Maria Torres had been leading reconnaissance missions to observe these new developments firsthand. Her reports painted a picture of alien societies that had fundamentally changed their approach to governance and cooperation. "The Corvani-Delian alliance has maintained peace for 3 years now," she reported to the intelligence briefing. "Not because we forced them to, but because they finally understand that war costs more than it gains." The former enemies had learned to resolve disputes through negotiation and compromise. They had established joint colonies where Corvani and Delian families lived side by side, sharing the work of building new homes on previously uninhabitable worlds. Dr. Nathan Cross had returned to Earth 2 years earlier, but his detailed studies of alien adaptation continued to influence human policy decisions. His research showed that the surviving species had developed genuine independence rather than mere survival skills. "The Altarians have not only recovered from the plague," Nathan reported, "they have developed their own medical research programs that are making genuine innovations. They are solving problems we never taught them to solve." The Altarian survivors had combined their traditional knowledge with simplified, human medical techniques to create new approaches to healthcare that worked within their limited technological capabilities. They were helping other species deal with similar health crises, becoming teachers themselves rather than permanent students. Ambassador Grace Kelly had been conducting careful diplomatic exchanges with the alien coalition for months. Her assessment of their sincerity and capability was the foundation for the decision President Smith now faced. "They are not asking us to resume our old role as galactic protectors," Grace reported to the Diplomatic Council. "They are proposing a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility." The alien proposal was unlike anything from the old days. Instead of requesting human oversight, they were offering to contribute their own knowledge and resources to joint projects. They wanted to trade cultural insights, share scientific discoveries, and work together on challenges that affected all spacefaring species. Admiral Carl Johnson had reviewed the military implications of renewed contact with alien civilizations. His analysis showed that the surviving species no longer posed any threat to human security. Their combined military capabilities, are roughly equivalent to what Earth maintained 3 centuries ago, Carl reported. More importantly, their new governmental structures make large-scale warfare practically impossible. The survivor coalitions had built constitutional safeguards that required unanimous consent from multiple species before any military action could be authorized. They had learned that democracy was not about majority rule, but about protecting minority interests and maintaining cooperation even during disagreements. General Tony Martinez had been studying the technological developments in alien space. Instead of trying to recreate human high technology, the survivors had focused on developing intermediate technologies they could understand and maintain. They have created sustainable industrial bases that can support populations in the billions, Tony reported. Not at pre-withdrawal luxury levels, but at standards that provide health, education, and meaningful work for all citizens. The new alien civilizations had abandoned the goal of matching human technological capabilities. Instead, they had built societies that prioritized sustainability and equity over advancement and efficiency. Dr. Susan Clark had completed her analysis of the psychological changes in alien populations. Her findings showed that the trauma of the collapse had created fundamental shifts in how these species approached problems and relationships. They have developed what we might call collective wisdom, Susan reported to the Behavioral Science Committee. They remember the consequences of their past mistakes and actively work to avoid repeating them. The surviving alien cultures had built monuments and museums dedicated to remembering the collapse years. Children were educated about the importance of cooperation and the dangers of pride and prejudice. These were not abstract lessons, but living memories passed down by survivors who had witnessed the cost of hatred. Professor Kate Williams had documented the cultural renaissance taking place in alien space. Art, literature, and philosophy among the survivors reflected themes of unity, responsibility, and hope that had never existed during the years of human protection. They are creating stories about heroes who prevent wars rather than win them, Kate reported. Their greatest legends now celebrate those who build bridges rather than those who conquer enemies. The new alien cultures valued different qualities than their pre-withdrawal ancestors. Strength was measured by the ability to cooperate and build, rather than to dominate and destroy. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hughes had been monitoring the refugee populations that had formed the core of the new multi-species colonies. These communities had become laboratories for innovative approaches to government and society. They have created democratic systems that are more stable and inclusive than anything we ever helped them build, Ben reported. Because they designed these systems themselves, they understand how to maintain and improve them. The refugee colonies had developed unique forms of government that combined the best features of multiple species' political traditions. Instead of copying human democracy, they had created hybrid systems that reflected their own values and circumstances. Captain Danny Foster had been observing the gradual restoration of interstellar trade using technologies the aliens could maintain themselves. The new trade networks were smaller than in the old days, but they were growing steadily and sustainably. They are using human-inspired technologies, but modified for their own capabilities, Danny reported. Travel is slower and trade volumes are lower, but the systems are completely under their own control. The surviving species had learned to value independence over efficiency. They preferred technologies they could understand and repair over more advanced systems that required outside expertise. Dr. Lisa Reynolds had been analyzing the biological and medical developments in alien space. The survivors had made remarkable progress in developing healthcare systems that worked within their resource limitations. They have combined traditional healing methods with simplified human medical techniques, Lisa reported. The results are less sophisticated than our advanced systems, but they are sustainable and effective for their populations. The alien medical systems reflected the same philosophy as their other technologies: practical sustainability over theoretical advancement. President Smith reviewed all these reports as he prepared to make his decision. The alien delegation had waited patiently for his answer, making no demands and issuing no ultimatums. They had demonstrated their independence and their commitment to cooperation. The question was whether humanity was ready to trust them with renewed partnership. They have proven they can survive without us, President Smith addressed the emergency session of Congress. They have proven they can cooperate without our oversight. They have proven they have learned from their mistakes. The question now is whether we can learn from ours. The debate that followed was intense but respectful. Some members argued for continued isolation, believing that any renewed contact would eventually lead to the same patterns of dependency. Others argued for limited engagement, believing that humanity had a moral obligation to help rebuild what the collapse had destroyed. But a growing number supported full partnership, arguing that the aliens had genuinely changed and that humanity could benefit from their hard-won wisdom about cooperation and sustainability. After 3 days of debate, Congress reached its decision. Humanity would return to the galaxy, but not as protectors or guardians. They would return as partners and equals, working together with the survivors to build something better than what had existed before. Captain Elena Rodriguez was chosen to lead the first human mission beyond Sol system in 10 years. As she stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned ship, UCS New Horizon, she felt both excitement and responsibility for the historic moment. Destination: Altarian Prime, she announced to her mixed crew of human volunteers and alien liaison officers who had been living in exile on Earth. Mission: to begin the next chapter of galactic civilization. The ship that approached Altarian Prime was smaller than the great vessels of the old Terran defense fleet.